For a long time, I truly believed talent was the answer to everything. I believed if you were gifted enough, if things came naturally to you, the rest would fall into place. That belief shaped my confidence. It shaped how I trained, it shaped how I saw myself. Everywhere I went, people reminded me of it. They said I was different, that I had something special, and for a while, it felt like they were right. Talent opened doors for me before I even knew how heavy those doors could be. Opportunities came early, success came faster than expected, mistakes didn't cost much. If something went wrong, talent usually fixed it. That's a dangerous comfort. Because when talent saves you again and again, you start believing it always will. You stop questioning what you're missing. You stop preparing for the moment when talent isn't enough. And that moment came quietly. No big failure, no dramatic collapse, just a slow realization that something had changed. I was working just as hard, maybe harder than before. I felt ready, I felt capable, but suddenly being good wasn't separating me anymore. The margin for error felt smaller, the pace felt faster, and for the first time, I wasn't standing out just by being myself. That's when it hit me. I had stepped into a space where talent was no longer rare. Everyone here had it. Speed, skill, instinct. These weren't advantages anymore. They were requirements. And once talent became the baseline, everything I had relied on started feeling incomplete. The game wasn't asking how gifted I was. It was asking how disciplined I could be, how consistent, how mentally steady. That realization was uncomfortable, because when talent has always been your identity, questioning it feels personal. It feels like questioning your worth. I started noticing the gaps talent had hidden from me before. Gaps in habits, in patience, in how I responded when things didn't come easily. And for the first time, talent didn't protect me from that truth. That was the day I understood something no one had ever told me. Talent might get you noticed, it might get you in the room, but once you're there, talent doesn't decide who stays. And that realization changed everything. After that realization, everything around me started to look different. Practices felt sharper, games felt faster, and the space I thought talent gave me began to disappear. I wasn't worse than before. In many ways, I was better, but the difference was clear. Talent no longer separated me. It blended in. Everyone around me moved well. Everyone understood the game. Everyone had worked hard to get here. What used to feel special now felt expected. That's when I understood something uncomfortable. At this level, talent isn't praised. It's assumed. No one is impressed by what comes naturally to you anymore. They're watching what happens when things don't come easily, how you respond when you're uncomfortable, how you adjust when your strengths are neutralized. And suddenly, the confidence I built on being gifted felt fragile. Not because I lacked ability, but because ability alone wasn't being rewarded the way it used to be. I started noticing players who didn't stand out in obvious ways, but never seemed overwhelmed. They weren't flashy, they weren't talked about constantly, but they were reliable, calm, consistent. They made the right decisions over and over again without forcing anything. At first, that confused me. I wondered how they stayed ahead without drawing attention. And then it clicked. They weren't relying on talent to save them. They were relying on habits. That realization hit harder than any criticism ever could, because it meant talent had protected me from developing parts of my game I now desperately needed. It had allowed me to succeed without fully building discipline, routine, and patience. And now, surrounded by people who had already done that work, I felt exposed, not embarrassed. Exposed, like something important had been missing all along, and I was only just discovering it. This was the moment where frustration quietly entered the picture. Not anger, not panic, just the unsettling feeling of being stuck between who I was and who I needed to become. I belonged here, but I wasn't secure yet, and that's a difficult place to stand, because talent can guide you through that gap. It can't tell you what to fix or how long it will take. All it can do is remind you that what once carried you forward is no longer enough on its own. And that's when the journey stopped being about talent and started being about growth. That's when the cracks became impossible to ignore, not because something went wrong, but because talent stopped covering the small mistakes it once hid so easily. At lower levels, you could recover. You could improvise. You could rely on instinct to fix things in real time. Here, there was no space for that. One wrong decision didn't just affect a moment, it changed the possession. One lapse in focus didn't go unnoticed. It shifted momentum, and suddenly, the game felt less forgiving. I started realizing how much the details mattered. Timing, spacing, reading situations before they fully developed. These weren't optional skills anymore. They were requirements, and talent alone couldn't guarantee them. It could help, but it couldn't replace awareness. It couldn't replace discipline, and it definitely couldn't replace consistency. That was a hard truth to accept, because it meant I couldn't rely on feeling on to perform well anymore. I had to be prepared even when I didn't feel confident. This is also the point where ego quietly entered the conversation, not in an obvious way, but in the form of resistance. Part of me wanted to believe I just needed more time, that eventually talent would reassert itself and everything would click, but deep down, I knew that thinking like that was dangerous. It delayed growth. It kept me comfortable when comfort was exactly what I needed to move away from. The top level doesn't punish you loudly. It exposes you patiently, over and over again. And the exposure isn't meant to break you. It's meant to show you where you still need to grow. I started seeing that clearly. The players who survived weren't the ones waiting for talent to rescue them. They were the ones who adapted quickly, who learned from mistakes without emotional attachment, who didn't take struggle as an insult to their ability. That realization was humbling because it forced me to admit that talent had given me a head start, but not a foundation. And now, without that foundation fully built, I felt vulnerable. Not incapable, just unfinished. Standing at a point where the path forward was clear, but uncomfortable, I could keep leaning on what came naturally and hope it was enough, or I could accept that this level required something more deliberate, more patient, and more demanding. That choice, whether to evolve or stay protected by old strengths, was the moment everything truly began to change. Once that truth settled in, it didn't leave quietly. It stayed with me during practices, during games, during moments when I thought I should feel confident but didn't. This was the phase where talent stopped feeling like an advantage and started feeling like a responsibility, because now I knew it wasn't enough on its own. And knowing that changes how you look at everything you do. This was also where my ego was tested the most. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a subtle, uncomfortable one. I had to accept that being gifted didn't automatically make me prepared. That potential didn't equal reliability, and that realization hurt because it meant starting over mentally while already being at a high level physically. I wasn't learning how to be good anymore. I was learning how to be consistent, and consistency demands humility. There were days when frustration crept in, days when I felt like I was working harder than ever. Yet progress felt invisible. That's one of the hardest lessons at the top level. Improvement doesn't announce itself. You don't always feel it happening, and when talent has given you quick rewards in the past, slow growth feels like something is wrong. I had to fight the urge to panic, to force results, to prove myself in moments that didn't require proving anything. I also started noticing how differently I responded to mistakes. Before, I could shake them off easily. Now, they stayed with me longer, not because they mattered more on the scoreboard, but because they challenged my identity. Each mistake felt like a reminder that I couldn't rely on talent to erase it anymore. I had to learn from it, sit with it, fix it. That process was uncomfortable, but necessary. This was the phase where I understood that the top level doesn't reward confidence built on ability alone. It rewards confidence built on preparation, on repetition, on knowing that even when things don't feel good, your foundation will hold. And building that foundation required me to let go of who I thought I was and start becoming who this level demanded. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't fast, but it was honest. And for the first time, I stopped asking when talent would save me and started asking how I could support it. That shift didn't make things easier immediately, but it made them real, and real growth, I learned, always begins right after the ego steps aside. That's when I stopped looking for shortcuts. I accepted that there was no single adjustment that would suddenly make everything click. No moment where talent would come back and smooth things over. What I needed wasn't a breakthrough. It was a foundation. Something solid enough to hold me up even on days when confidence was low and results were uneven. I started paying attention to the things I had once overlooked, my routines, my preparation before practice, how I reviewed film, how I recovered after games. None of it felt exciting, and that's exactly why it mattered. This level doesn't reward excitement. It rewards consistency, and consistency doesn't care how talented you are. It only responds to how disciplined you're willing to be. There were days when this process felt slow and frustrating. I didn't feel dramatically better from one day to the next. In fact, there were moments when I wondered if I was moving backward. But something was changing quietly. I was becoming more aware, more intentional. I wasn't relying on instinct alone anymore. I was supporting it with preparation, and that made my game feel steadier, even when it didn't feel spectacular. I also had to rebuild my relationship with confidence. Before, confidence came easily because success came easily. Now, confidence had to be earned daily, not through highlights or praise, but through showing up correctly, through doing the small things right, even when no one noticed. That kind of confidence is quieter, but it lasts longer. It doesn't disappear after a bad performance because it isn't tied to outcomes anymore. This phase taught me patience in a way talent never had. It forced me to respect the process instead of rushing it. To understand that growth at this level often feels boring before it feels rewarding. And slowly, without any big announcement, I felt stronger. Not because I was more gifted, but because I was more prepared. For the first time, I wasn't asking talent to save me. I was building something that didn't need saving. Somewhere along the way, I realized my confidence was no longer loud. It didn't announce itself the way it used to. Before, confidence felt like excitement, like certainty, like knowing I could rely on talent to carry me through whatever came next. Now it felt quieter, heavier, more controlled, and at first I mistook that for doubt. But it wasn't doubt, it was awareness. I began to understand that real confidence at this level doesn't come from feeling unstoppable. It comes from knowing you're prepared for whatever happens. Good day or bad day, big moment or quiet one, that kind of confidence doesn't spike after a great performance. And it doesn't disappear after a mistake. It stays steady because it's built on work, not emotion. I stopped chasing the feeling of being confident and focused, instead on behaving confidently. Showing up the same way every day, trusting my routines, trusting the work I had put in, even when results didn't immediately reflect it. And slowly, that trust started to replace fear. Not all at once, but enough to feel grounded. I also learned that pressure never goes away at the top level. You don't overcome it, you coexist with it. The difference is how you interpret it. Before, pressure felt like something threatening, like proof that something could go wrong. Now it felt like confirmation that I belonged here, that expectations existed because I had earned them. That shift didn't make the game easier, but it made it clearer. I wasn't playing to protect my reputation anymore. I was playing to execute what I had prepared for, and when mistakes happened, because they always do, they no longer felt like personal failures. They felt like information, feedback, something to learn from, not something to hide from. This version of confidence isn't glamorous. It won't impress people from the outside, but it's resilient. It doesn't, collapse under pressure or disappear in tough moments. And at this level, resilience matters more than anything talent alone can give you. Looking back now, I understand that realizing talent isn't enough was never meant to discourage me. It was meant to mature me. It forced me to stop relying on what came naturally and start respecting what had to be built. Talent gave me an entry point, but it was discipline, patience, and mindset that taught me how to stay and not less than reshape the way I see success altogether. I no longer chase moments that prove how gifted I am. I focus on becoming dependable. Someone who shows up prepared, regardless of circumstances, someone who doesn't panic when things feel uncomfortable, because discomfort is no longer a signal to doubt myself, it's a signal that growth is happening. That shift didn't make things easier, but it made them sustainable. The biggest change wasn't in my performance, it was in my relationship with myself. I stopped measuring my worth by flashes of brilliance and started valuing consistency. I stopped expecting confidence to arrive automatically and learned how to build it intentionally. And once that happened, the fear of not being enough slowly lost its power. If you're watching this and you've ever felt confused after early success, you've ever wondered why what once worked doesn't work anymore, you're not broken. You're leveling up. That moment when talent stops being enough is often the moment real growth begins. It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary, and how you respond to it will define who you become next. Talent might open the door, but discipline, mindset, and consistency decide whether you stay. If you want more honest stories about growth, pressure, and the reality behind success at the highest level, stay here. Subscribe. There's always more beyond what comes naturally.